My colleague, my esteemed colleague, Neville Agnew, is the Senior Principal Project Specialist at the GCI. He joined the GCI in the auspicious year of 1988, right? And he doesn't only work in China. The whole time we were working on these projects, he was, among other places, going back and forth to Egypt and to other continents as well. So he has quite an impressive international range as far as his projects. But today, of course, he's going to talk about Dunhuang. Neville?
Thank you very much, Marcia. My theme is deterioration, damage, and loss, both natural and human, and its slowing, not its reversal or restoration, which is actually, strictly speaking, impossible from a conservation point of view, from any other point of view as well. But although I cover much of the same ground as has already been covered by Director Fan and Guolong Lai and will be covered by Director Wang Shudong shortly, maybe I'll get a slightly different perspective on our work and our collaborative work at Dunhuang over the last decades. This slide shows the site looking to the south. And I want you to note, particularly on the right-hand side of the slide, that slope, which is an erosional slope between the cliff face in which the caves are cut and the plateau above. That's caused by the constant flow of sand, wind-blown sand, over the surface, over the edge of the cliff. And it shaved it down and down and down. And you'll see the consequences of that later on. But let's start with the inevitable consequence of abandonment over time. One sees how the world deteriorates, and in this Stein's 1907 photograph shows the result of centuries of abandonment and neglect at the Dunhuang site. You've seen variants of this image already. This must surely represent the lowest point in the life of Mogao, though there were still additional tribulations to come, as when the Russian refugees arrived in the early 1920s and occupied the caves. They caused great damage due to fires and soot in the caves. Some caves were actually incinerated. They weren't just soot-covered, they were literally burnt. This was not necessarily an act of deliberate vandalism. On the contrary, it was very cold. The climate's extreme. This is the 1920s. It would be another 20 years before the tide effectively would turn in favor of preservation of the site. I won't mention the story of Wang Yuan-Lu again. It's too well known to all of you here to recount. But less well known, perhaps, than the sale of the manuscripts to Stein and Pelliot and others are his attempts at reinvigorating the site as a religious one. These are photographs, comparative ones, from 2011 and 1908 on the right. And you can see whether it was Wang, the Taoist priest Wang Yuan-Lu's work on the left or not, we don't know, but sometime between 1908 and 2011, when the photograph was taken, this type of intervention was undertaken, and now it has some historical relevance, and so I imagine will not be removed by the Dunhuang Academy. So this is what happens as well in this photograph, although Wang Shudong has pointed out to me that the photograph on the right, the early one, might have been taken between the statues and the wall paintings. That's not known, but I think that's not quite correct. Now, the point here is that this attitude is not unique to Dunhuang. Religious buildings, churches, temples, are frequently viewed through one lens only. And there are many instances today where religious sensibilities trump authenticity, and where restoration is undertaken without regard to historic truth. So this is not at all unique or indeed surprising. And so the priest Wang Yuanlu has got some ambivalence in many respects. He discovered the library cave. He sold the documents. He did restoration, so-called. And so he has a sort of schizophrenic element to his work there. What is sure that his name will live in the annals of the history of Dunhuang forever, as long as the site survives. But continuing the parade of persecution of Macau after almost all the depredations of the period up to 1920, we still have the instance of the infamous Langdon Warner, whom Lai Guolong mentioned in some detail. This image is faithfully replicated in the cave replica on the plaza here in Cave 320, the third of the cave replicas that we have. In fact, this photograph is taken from the replica, not from the original, but it does show where the wall paintings were lifted. This you could see almost as the last of the predations on Macau. In fact, the deputy director of the Dunhuang Academy, Luo Huaqing, has written of an interesting example from the mid-1930s. I think now that represents the very last attempt at removal of material from the site. This was published in the International Dunhuang Project newsletter by Susan Whitfield. And it accounts, speaking from memory, in mid-1930s, a Western journalist visiting Dunhuang attempted to make off with, I think, a small statue, and he was noticed, and he was relieved of his illegal plunder and taken away under close escort. So that really is the brief story of how the very nadir of Dunhuang bottomed out in the mid-1930s. But apart from human damage to the site, we also have the damage from nature. What has been called the reign of nature, R-E-I-G-N. There's also the rain, R-A-I-N of nature, but the reign of nature is the overriding deteriorative consequence of all things following time's arrow and deteriorating. This slide is the visual evidence of the consequence of the first slide I showed with that erosional slope. Upper tier caves sometimes had their, as in this case, the ceilings eroded through and collapsed. This is a problem that has to be solved, has been solved quite effectively through an intervention that we developed with the Dunhuang Academy to seal the cave in an aesthetically pleasing way and an effective way. This one, unfortunately, is not effective. As you can see, attempts were not effective at all. The other is the reign of nature with an R, and the flood that, this is from a recent flood. There were 2 consecutive years, a few years ago, in which raging floods tore through the site. Fortunately, the Dunhuang Academy has taken care to channelize the Dachuan River, and now that ancient threat to the site, which flooded many of the base level, lowest tier caves at Dunhuang, has now been brought under control. Apparently, I have not witnessed it myself, but Wang Shidong has told me that in the middle of the night, within a few hours, the river can rise 15 feet. In fact, overwhelming the bridge, washing away the roads and so on. If you go to the immersive experience part of our current exhibition, outside the 3D representation of Cave 45, you can actually see footage taken in very recent years of the flood, and you can get a sense of the enormous impact it has had on the site. But another part of the reign of nature's terror on a site is earthquake. It's the sleeping dragon. I like to think of it as the sleeping dragon at Mogao. It's not a benevolent Chinese dragon, but a demonic monster. If you look at the red arrow, that represents the site. The dark patch going from it is the double fault line that defines the Sunway Mountains. This is a major tectonic fault. So what we're looking at is the enormous potential impact for damage to the site from earthquake in the future. We're always between two earthquakes, the last one and the one to come, as people in Los Angeles and California know. So it might be a priority for the Dunhuang Academy to map all of the detachment between the painted plaster and the rock body and start to intervene through grouting. From the scale of the site to the scale of the wall paintings, one can see pigment change. Again, this is represented in the replica caves on the plaza here. But others are, of course, and I won't show illustrations, salt corrosion, detachment of the plaster, and so on. We can say that with the foundation of the Dunhuang, what was to become the Dunhuang Academy in 1944, the upward trajectory of the site towards preservation to what it is today began with Zhang Shuhong. This is a photo montage that was taken, as you can read there, made in about 2000. We have the three directors, Zhang Shuhong there and Dunhuang there, and Director Fan as a younger woman with a flashlight illuminating the future need of the site. Others are the villainous, where is he? Is that Langdon Warner there? Yes. And others, and Wang Yuanlu. So it's a wonderful illustration of the beginning and the consequences of the work of Zhang Shuhong. Of course, you know, as you've seen the early 1963 work of the Academy to start the physical stabilization of the site. So truly, Zhang Shuhong and his successors were the visionaries who saved the site. Today, the site looks like this. It's stabilized with concrete facade. And in the late 80s, as others have mentioned, notably Lai Guolong, Getty started working with the Dunhuang Academy. And our method was really based upon preservation of the values of the site, the significance under Chinese law of artistic, scientific, and historic values of the site, and preserving them. In other words, all interventions on the site should endeavor not to harm any of those values. They're all of great importance. Social value is another one. We developed a set of guidelines at national level with the national authority in China, which really have been the guiding precepts of our work in China. In order to translate these China principles, as we call them, into reality, we undertook with the Dunhuang Academy the project for the conservation of Cave 85 that's been mentioned already. It was a 10-year project of study, diagnosis of causes of deterioration, beginnings of testing for methods of intervention, and where do we go from here? Sorry, I think I skipped one. And finally, the actual treatment itself and the viewing platform with the interpretive panels, which has been quite a success, together with the LED lighting. But there have been other problems that arose because of that pernicious salt that exists and cannot totally be removed from the walls and the wall paintings. We've published this in our work. You might recognize the image there. It's very close to, if not the same, as the iconic image for the exhibition. And Director Fan has also mentioned the problem of growth in visitor numbers from a small number in the 1970s to well over 1 million now. This only goes to 2011, but the trend is quite clear. It shows blips downwards when you have something like SARS, if you remember, in the early 20s, but it rapidly recovers. Other blips downwards are the economic downturns and so on, but the upward trajectory is inevitable. And China is the largest tourist market in the world today, by far. In anticipation of this other new emerging threat, which is a social and a human one and not a natural one, we of course have undertaken studies, as you've seen already, to develop a carrying capacity for the site. And this has been implemented. You've also seen this image, the new visitor center, which has been a brilliant move on part of the Dunhuang Academy in siting it off away from the site and providing interpretive materials there such that you can control and inform the visitor to the caves and really schedule throughout the day the flow of visitors. They come, it's to ensure a better visitor experience. Now, in summary, over the last decades, we've enjoyed an extraordinarily successful and harmonious and collaboration with our colleagues at the Dunhuang Academy. Certainly, it's been for me, it's been an extraordinary experience and one that I value very greatly. And it's culminated in our exhibition here. And indeed, this symposium is part of the culmination of the project. And you can see here on the plaza the crowds that are gathering to enjoy the replica caves. We can't bring everybody to Dunhuang, but we brought the replica caves to Los Angeles. So thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Susan Whitfield, is currently in residence as a Getty Scholar here in Los Angeles, but when she's done being a Getty Scholar, she's going to go back to London, and she's the curator of the Central Asian manuscripts at the British Library, and of course helped us loan the Diamond Sutra for the exhibition. But also, she is the director of this very important resource, the International Dunhuang Project, whose goal is to conserve, to catalog, to digitize, and provide research materials, basically to disseminate knowledge on this important collection of materials on research on Dunhuang. Susan.
Thank you very much, Martha and Neville, GCI, GRI, for inviting me, and of course to Director Fan of the Dunhuang Academy for enabling our work over the past 30 years. I'm going to speak very fast because I've got 20 minutes and a lot to say in it, so excuse me, and I will raise points that I hope we can perhaps raise in discussion. Okay, so today we've been hearing lots about the conservation, the artistic setting of the caves, the geographical setting, cultural setting, and the religious setting. Today I'm going to talk a bit more in my talk about what the material culture of Buddhism can tell us more about the social and economic situation of Dunhuang in its landscape at the time. I'm not going to talk so much about piety, which was a very important drive for enabling the caves to be created in the first place, but I'm going to talk more about profit, which was equally important in enabling their building. Okay, we've all seen maps. There's a Silk Road, land, sea routes all over Afro-Eurasia, and this is the area that we've talked about before with Dunhuang in the Hershey or Gansu corridor to the east, a very important branch of the Eastern Silk Road. Now, Buddhism, of course, is traditionally thought to have come along to the Tarim Basin and to Dunhuang, which is up here, through northern India, where it arose in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. In fact, that took several centuries. This is a map done by Matthew Cholik in Australia, showing clusters of monasteries, and it shows very well the movement of Buddhism up through North India, Central Asia, and around the Tarim, and then down the Hershey corridor and into China. These are cave temples, monasteries, stupas, other architectural features. And if we look, I'm going to look today at two architectural forms. The stupa, which was originated as a place to house the relics of Buddha, his finger bones, his teeth, and there's many of these reliquaries around the world still. A famous one, for example, at Kandy in Sri Lanka, where there are major processions every year and festivals. Later, its function widened so that it housed relics of saints, of other important people. It marked important places. But these would have been dominant features in the landscape, much as medieval cathedrals are dominant features in the European landscape. They'd have risen above the domestic architecture. This is plain, but you have to use your imagination. They would have been plastered, often painted, gilded, and adorned. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. This is at Sanchi in northern India, dating from about the 3rd century BC. So we see the stupa, see this architectural form, along with the cave temple that we've discussed already. Also, 4th, 3rd century BC. This is at Ajanta in western India. The cave temples, Buddhist cave temples at Ajanta. So already by the 3rd century BC, we see these two major Buddhist architectural forms. But in fact, although they move northwards into Central Asia, it's not really until the rise of the Kushan Empire in the 1st to 4th centuries AD that we see a real movement of Buddhism across into the Taklamakan, into the Taklamakan, Tarim Basin, and thence to the Hershey corridor. So the Taklamakan is here, and here you have the Pamir Mountains. So the Kushan, whose ruling elite probably came from Dunhuang several centuries before, they'd been pushed west by the Xiongnu, the Huns. They set up big empire in Central Asia, unifying and making stable this whole mountainous area for the first time, and thus really enabling monks and merchants and others, diplomats and military men, to travel across safely. And this was really seen as the rise of the sort of crux of the Silk Road, when you get a significant rise in mercantile activity, both north-south and east-west, along this Central Asian heartland. Now, this is also when we see Buddhism coming into this area, and that's not coincidental. We know from lots and lots of sources and lots of evidence that Buddhism had a very symbiotic relationship with trade. Buddhist monks in their proselytizing often joined trade missions so that they could travel, they could get support, logistical support, monetary support, patronage to travel to foreign lands. Those merchants then would often introduce them to local rulers, to elites in the places they ended up in, and then they would get more money and support to establish monasteries, establish temples, build cave temples, build stupas, and buildings like this. We know little about the movement of Buddhism into the Tarim, but it did happen at this time. So we see, for example, the stupa develops over this time. And by the Kushan period, this is a stupa in the Swat Valley in what is now Pakistan, but was part of the Kushan Empire, you see it's a much more complicated form. It has bases with stairways and a much more elongated dome. And we see exactly the same form appearing across the Pamir in the Tarim. This is at Subashi, about the same period, 3rd, 4th century, on the northern branch of the Silk Road, just to the northwest of Dunhuang, near Turfan. And you can see the same stupa form. So it's becoming more complex, higher verticalization of religious structures. They stand out more in the environments that they reach further to the skies. And this is not coincidence. There was obviously, I'm only showing one example here, but I could show 30, 40. There was obviously constant interaction between the Central Asian Kushans and the Tarim, because we see the same architectural changes taking place in both regions. Architecture is complex. You can't, I should just say something about cave temples. The cave temple also moved from India into Central Asia. These are at Tajikistan on the Afghan border in the Wakhan corridor. You can see the caves up there, Buddhist cave temples, and then Kizil on the northern Silk Road, again northwest of Dunhuang in the Tarim. All the way along, as previous speaker mentioned, we get rock cut cave temples, and then of course at Dunhuang, and they go into China. Now, just to talk a bit about architecture very, very briefly. Architecture is a complex form. You can't put it in your pocket like you can a Buddhist scroll and carry it to a new place where it's found. So material culture requires a level of complexity to transfer architectural forms. These were completely new forms to the Tarim. Nothing like this had been built before. So we have to ask how they got there, how they were built, who enabled the patronage, who enabled the architectural drawings for these massive, and they are massive, monuments to Buddhism to be built. This is at Rawak on the southern Silk Road at a place called Khotan, which we've already heard quite a lot about. Sorry, I just need to keep an eye on my iPhone because I don't wear a watch, so I can keep an eye on the time. And we know again from many sources that it was often monks who supervised the buildings of these structures. And we have stories about monks who would go to foreign lands and they would draw a picture of a stupa in the sand or in the earth and say, this is what we want. And then this structure would be built. Perhaps some of the artisans, some of the architects came with them, or perhaps the local architects just learned by trial and error how to build these new structures. One of the most famous examples is Xuanzang, and we've heard lots about Xuanzang so far, the famous 7th century monk who traveled from China to India to collect scriptures. When he returned to the capital of China, Xi'an, Chang'an as then was, he asked of the emperor that a stupa be built in the capital on the model of this great stupa of King Kanishka. Now, we have no idea of what the stupa of King Kanishka looks like because it's no longer extant, but the model, the stupa that Xuanzang asked to be built is extant, although it's been rebuilt many times, the Greater Wild Goose Pagoda in Chang'an, some of you might have visited. But he came along and he probably drew a plan and said, this is what I want. And the local builders tried to build it. They weren't very successful because within a few years it was falling down, and then it had to be rebuilt, and then it suffered an earthquake, lots of those, and then it had to be rebuilt and so on and so forth. But we can see something of the complexity. And the complexity is not just in the architecture, of course. These are expensive structures. You can't just put up a structure like this easily. It costs a lot of money, a lot of organization. You need patronage, and you need a community there to support it and to worship at it. Because these weren't isolated buildings. Now Rawak's in the middle of a desert, but it would have been the middle of a thriving temple. And there would have been visitors there. And the visitors, the temple authorities are a bit like the Dunhuang Academy today. They'd have had to manage the visitors. They'd have had to manage the donations that the visitors gave. They would have had to look after this structure and make sure it was painted or re-gilded every year. They would have had to raise funds from the local community to enable this work to happen. So we have to see Buddhism as having a dialogue constantly with the community in which it's in. And it's sometimes quite difficult to see that when you go and visit these structures that are wonderfully now in the middle of the desert and there's nothing around. It's rather romantic, but of course they would have once been very, very bustling places. Rock cut temples too. Again, we have to use our imagination. They would have had freestanding structures in front, like eaves, to make them look like freestanding cave temples. They were meant to look like freestanding buildings. The ones in India were often rock cut, and they had rock fronts and wooden eaves at the front, or sometimes stone eaves. Those in China used Chinese architectural techniques for the front bits, but they would have all had fronts on them like this, so that you thought you were entering a freestanding building, and they would have all been adorned. The banners that we find in the Dunhuang caves were used for processions, but many of them would have adorned the cave temples. So they would have been colorful, fully adorned places. The stupas, too, would have been full, covered, as I said, often gilded, covered with silk and other offerings. We have, well, I should say, of course, many of the offerings that, like the silk that was used for these cave temples and stupas, has long, long disappeared. It's ephemeral. We have to remember there would have also been offerings of incense, of other objects of food, and those are all ephemeral, so we have very few left. This is one piece that might have been originally a piece of silk woven especially to be placed on a stupa, and I can talk about it in more detail later. I haven't got time now. We have a few little textual sources to give us an idea of the scale of this. So, for example, another Chinese monk who traveled to India in the 6th century has written that there were colored canopies and banners hung over the stupas in the tens of thousands. Of more, half of these originated from the Wei. The Wei was a century before. So you can imagine one of these stupas with all these colored canopies with pieces of silk like this in layers and layers and layers on top of it. And it would have disintegrated, blown away, and been lost. But this would have been millions of meters of silk over these centuries for all these hundreds of stupas, if not thousands of stupas in this region. So we're talking about a lot of material. That doesn't come free. People have to buy it. It has to be produced. There has to be a trade in that. Similarly, for the objects that we used for the worship, for the foundation of the stupas and cave temples and at their worship. As I said, the stupas were reliquaries, and inside the heart of the stupa was a chamber, relic chamber, and this is one from Afghanistan from the 1st, 2nd century, a small relic box, casket in crystal and gold, which would have held some of those relics. Unfortunately, as you can see from the hole in the top of this stupa, this is Endera and the southern Tarim, they've all been stolen. So we have very few of these to give us a full story. We have one very famous example from China, from a temple called Famansi, just near Xi'an, the capital, and you get some idea of the richness, little sort of, the smallest casket, it's like Russian dolls, all fitting inside each other, and the smallest casket would have held what were 3 sections of the finger bone of the Buddha. We know about them from historical sources and the great processions that happened every year. And then they were placed inside each other, and each casket was covered in wonderful silk, and there were lots of other offerings in there. And, of course, silk and other rich materials were used for the manuscripts. Famous picture of Paul Pelliot inside the cave with what looks like a candle, which always sends shivers up my spine, had it fallen over. You see the manuscripts are wrapped. Here, there's several scrolls inside a wrapper, and this is a sutra wrapper, often made of silk, sometimes of hemp and other things, but they'd have all been wrapped inside these sometimes very expensive items. They would have all originally had silk ties like this, braided silk ties. There's still quite a few left, but the vast majority have long been disappeared. And then, of course, there were other materials such as the dyes and pigments. This piece is in the exhibition, so I won't speak about it, but it dyed with indigo and written with gold ink. But more importantly, of course, the cave temples from Ajanta onwards were painted floor to ceiling, as we've seen. This is Ajanta, and you can just about see traces of the paintings that would have covered the whole area. When we go to a place like this, again, it's often very difficult to visualize, and this is an artist's reproduction of a medieval cathedral, what it looks like today and what it would have looked like in medieval times, a lot covered with paintings and much brighter. Of course, at Dunhuang, we fortunately still have the paintings extant in many cases, so we get an idea of the richness, the visual richness of this. But behind this visual richness lies a lot of effort, a lot of complexity. Sarah Fraser has talked a lot about and written a lot about the complexity of the workshops, the artists' workshops done to build these things. But in 1936, after the caves were first discovered and there was some preliminary analysis done on them, the conservation scientist Gettin said that the range of mineral pigments is vast, and it's only by far-reaching trade intercourse that these can be assembled at any one place. At that point, he was just looking at mineral pigments. Thanks to the work of the GCI and Cave 85 and other people, we know that there were lots of organic colorants as well. So there was a great range of colors, pigments and organic colorants used for the cave paintings, used for dyeing the manuscripts, as well as all these silks, precious materials to put in the relic chambers. These didn't just appear by themselves, and they were needed in large numbers. Again, Langdon Warner, and I'll put him in a slightly better light here because he was a scholar and historian. After this initial thing, he said our next task, the initial work on the pigments, would be to determine the source of these minerals and plants. If some of them are to be found locally, we must determine whether others came from Central Asia or India or China, and then where the manufacture was undertaken and whether they came in their raw or already prepared state. Now, I'm very pleased that the Getty Research Institute has given me a grant for 3 months, so I'm able to carry forward this work, which hasn't yet been started really since 1938, and to start to look at these supply lines and how many pigments were needed, how much, and what they cost and where they came from. So we're just really starting this work, despite the Langdon Warner suggesting it in 1938. So we see three things when we look at the Buddhist caves and the Buddhist stupas throughout the Tarim Basin. We see that there was regular and sustained inter-regional movement of Buddhists and others transmitting artistic and architectural styles. We see regular and sustained inter-regional movement of goods used for building, decoration, and worship at these places. And we see that there has to be surplus wealth locally to enable this work, considerable surplus wealth. This has never been quantified. We might never be able to quantify the amount of trade. But I think what we can see is, by principle of Occam's razor, that trade is the one thing that will enable all these three points here. And so, again, in the Tarim, we see Buddhism being very symbiotically related to the merchants who are traveling, to the local systems of patronage, to the wealth that was brought in by this long-distance trade in luxury goods. And without all that, we would have no Dunhuang today. So although we look at it, and of course it was built with great piety by the monks of the time, we also have to remember, as in all our endeavors here at the GCI, GRI, and Dunhuang Academy, that funding is necessary for all our work. And to think back, put ourselves in the position of these monks years and years ago as they were endeavoring to find the funding to enable the building and creation of these wonderful masterpieces. Thank you.
And finally, one of the pleasures of this conference, bringing together scholars and researchers from China, Europe, the Americas, is to have the directors from the Dunhuang Academy here. And our present speaker is Wang Shudang, who was just appointed director of the Dunhuang Academy in 2015. Before that, he was director of the Conservation Institute there, and also assistant director of the Academy. Please welcome Wang Shudang.
Dear friends and scholars, so happy to be here to participate this symposium, as well as in honor of the life and the works of Director Emeritus Fan Jingshi at Dunhuang about 53 years. I really appreciate GCI and GRI and UCLA organized a series of academic events. Thank you, all of you, to be here to share with us on Dunhuang. Today, I just focused on the conservation, research, and dissemination of Dunhuang. I would like to give the appreciate for the Getty Trust and the Dunhuang Foundation and the Robert Hu Family Foundation and the Lucy Foundation and another supports for this exhibition and symposium. Just now, the Professor Rong and Director Fan and another speakers talking about Dunhuang in detail. I don't want to repeat some. I just emphasize 3 points. One is that it was lucky for Dunhuang playing important roles along the Silk Road because it's very special landscape, environment, and geographic location. Second one is that the content of the sites in Dunhuang is rich and diversified and is of great value to the world, transcending both time and space. Third one is that Mughal cave temples was listed as the World Heritage Site, with the site meeting all 6 culture criteria in 1987. You can see that there are 735 caves on the cliff along the 1,700 meters, and 492 caves decorated by wall paintings and statues. You can see the many wall paintings and the structures and statues, especially in the manuscripts from the cave library. There's somebody called, it's the museum on the wall. After discovery of the cave library and before 1944, the government had not paid more attention to the Dunhuang and Dunhuang caves. It's so bad and stupid. So many most of manuscripts and artifacts from library, cave, even wall paintings and statues from caves take away for the another countries. As you know, the by Stein, Pilot, Dunhuang, and Ossenberg, and another explorer and archaeologist. In 1944, the central government established National Institute on Dunhuang Art. To be the founder and first director, Chang Shuhun and his colleagues devoted the conservation, research, and the replica of wall painting and statues, and even disseminations. In the past 7 decades, 3 generations of Mogul presented Chang Shuhun, Dai Wenjie, and Fan Jinshi have been work hard and make the great contributions to the Dunhuang Caves and the Dunhuang Academy. It's an amazing photo. We can find 3 directors, Chang Shuhun, Dai Wenjie, and Mrs. Fan. So at that time, I was not born. After 2 years, I was born. So it is so lucky for me to join this team to do some work for the conservation and dissemination. The Mogul Caves has been fortunate enough to gain support and interest. This particular being the case since the 1980s, when Dunhuang Academy began undertaking many collaboration with China and internationally. Until now, we have had the many international projects with GCI, Mellon Foundation, Dunhuang Foundation, and Northwest University, and Illinois University, and in Americas. And we have another collaborative with the Tokyo University of Art, and the Tokyo Institute of Cultural Property, and Osaka University in Japan. And we also had a collaboration project with the Australian Commission, Heritage Commission, and the Courtauld Institute of Arts, and the French National Library, and another international institutions, including the British Library with Susan Whitfield. Of course, almost the projects focus on the conservation and the digitalizations. The Dunhuang Academy at Getty Conservation Institute have collaborated in an extensive range of projects in a number of fields, such as environment monitoring, wall painting, conservation of Cave 85, and sand control, and visitor carrying capacity, and the right master plan and the management of the Mogul sites. And GCI not only work with us, but also very friendly introduce some international institutes and experts join us to do the management of site and education training with the Australian and Cottard Institute, as well as the Lanzhou University, Peking University, and Northwestern University in China. This collaboration has now been recognized as the model for the international collaboration by the Chinese government. Nowadays, Dunhuang Academy has developed into the comprehensive academic research, site conservation, and the management organizations. Also is the national center for conservation of wall painting and earthen sites. So we not only do the conservation and the management work at Mogao, but also have another sites to do the conservation work, including Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Ningxia, Shanxi, Hebei, and another province. Digital Dunhuang project is our important task, supporting the government and the Mellon Foundation and Dunhuang Foundation, as well the Zhejiang University, Wuhan University, and Northwestern University before. So, and Microsoft also support us to make the special camera to do the status and very narrow caves for digitalizations. Nowadays, more and more visitors come to Dunhuang. And you can see it in 1979, just 20,000 per year. In 2014, just 800,000. Last year, the 1,115,000 visitors came to Dunhuang. This is so big challenges. So how to seek the balance between the conservation and tourism has been one of the important tasks of Dunhuang Academy in the past years. This center is a very useful solution. Just now, Director Fan mentioned it in detail. This is an idea from her. Next, I would like to focus on the future. In the future, based on the foundation laid by the predecessors for the study and the preservation of Dunhuang caves, Dunhuang Academy will further remain and expand domestic and international collaboration efforts. And with the broad mind and vision, push the conservation, Dunhuang studies, and the promotion, dissemination to higher level. Conservation and Mogao site is gradually making a transition from the emergency conservation to the preventive conservation phase. Based on the risk monitoring and control system. We are also on the theoretic study, applied research, and conservation of wall painting and earthen sites, as well as conservation philosophy. GCI would like to continue collaboration with us for the development the more program. In addition, we are celebrating the digitalization project. This is very important for us, for the another scholars, for the public. We would like to finish the very important caves in the next 10 days. In the Dunhuang studies field, we plan to full share and open up our digital resources to academics, both in the academy and outside. So we will take a positive and proactive position to attracting academics from both China and abroad, with a special focus on young scholars. The Dunhuang Foundation would like to support this very important program. We should create some programs to carry out the interdisciplinary research of Dunhuang and the Dunhuang caves. It will make an important contribution to the culture exchange between the different regions, different ethnic group, and different religions, as well as the development and coexistence of the world's cultural diversity. Dunhuang Academy will also set us, our scholars, especially young scholars, to the another international organizations, museums, institutes, universities, to study and to exchange. About the promotion of Dunhuang, we will take advantage of the resource based on several generations, several scholars from Dunhuang Academy's study to disseminate this very important culture and art. Firstly, the management of visitors at site should be perfected on the principle and the notions of responsible culture tourism. Secondly, the Academy has an outreach program where we send Dunhuang art into campus and high school, universities, and communities. We will also work with our international partners in organizing the international tour exhibitions. Thirdly, we will keep up with the development of the internet to share and enjoy Dunhuang art online. You can go to the website www.dunhuang.cn to see the very high reservation and very wonderful 30 caves. You can remember this website. In the future, the Dunhuang Academy see both opportunities and challenges. We will continue to seek support and assistance. We hope that after 10 to 14 years, the Dunhuang Academy will become the international platform dedicated to the research and the conservation of Dunhuang, even Silk Road. Let us watch Dunhuang together for the future generations. Welcome all our friends here, visit Dunhuang in the future. Thank you.
And we have a chance for you to ask Neville and Susan and Wang Shidong questions now, because we do have some time before lunch at 1. And we have microphones, I think. Yes, I'm not seeing them yet, but there will. So please wait for the microphone so that everyone can hear your question. Yeah, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm interested as an architect about the decisions that were made at the site, what I'm gathering in about the 1960s for the protection of the fronts of the caves, for the reconstruction of what Susan Whitfield described as the buildings through which you went to go into the caves. I haven't been to Dunhuang, but I have been to the caves outside of Datong and was quite surprised a couple of years ago to see new fronts being built there, which were highly decorative and elaborate, kind of temple, seemed rather fanciful Chinese temple frontages. And I was quite impressed and delighted to see that at Dunhuang, the frontages which were built in the 60s were in fact quite simple and quite identifiably new, so that the focus was on the one temple frontage which seems to have been reconstructed for something earlier, and then the rest are quite simple and plain. So I wonder if anyone from the panel is able to enlighten me about whether that was a deliberate approach to the architectural treatment of the front of the entrances of the caves. Thank you.
Who would like to take this difficult question?
Wang Shidong? While Wang Shidong is getting ready to answer, I'll interject my comment. The facades on the temple fronts at Macau are not new. They're old. In fact, although some have been rebuilt in the 20th century, but there's no new construction there, unlike Yonggang, where they have, in fact, built new facades.
It is a very good question. Yeah, in 1960s, the central government supported Dunhuang Academy to do the reinforcement of the cliff. But nobody knows how to do it. Just one very important expert scholars, that is the yes, let them see. So, no, the very important. Liang Sichen gave the very important philosophy. just the 10 words. 10 words is the 有若无，实若虚，大智若愚。that is very difficult to translate. Maybe if you can see the wall or another structure, but maybe you can find detail. This is the 有若无，实若虚。It is the very physical structure, but you can feel the nothing. Yeah. 大智若愚 it means very intelligent, but maybe you can feel the very not stupid, no, just very simple. Yeah. So the many engineer and technique really understood what it means, but Dunhuang Academy's staff and the engineer discussed deeply, and now and finally to decide the like this nowadays. If you go to the Mogul, I can interpret about this for you. Yeah.
Here's one. Right here in the center.
In the middle.
This one here.
To be a little more proactive.
Could you get the microphones ready so that we don't have a delay between?
We got it.
This one first, then. And then in the middle.
If I'm not mistaken, from the library cave, right now there's only about 300 scrolls left. The other 40 or 50,000 scrolls are in various countries, primarily in England and then France, and also in Japan and Russia. And I was quite shocked when Professor Fan told me during the night of the ceremony that all the good pieces are really not in China, are really in all the other countries. And when I asked her. And so the question I have to the panel and also maybe to Professor Fan is there an urgent need to really digitize all the collections in the various institutes, especially in France and also in England, so that that can be shared universally with others, probably especially with the Chinese people, and also what can be done to really speed up that process, because Dunhuang Academy has done a great job in the last couple of years to really do that, and I haven't really seen much been done in France and England and other countries. Maybe I'm wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question, because it very nicely allows me to talk about IDP, which is an international project which involves the Dunhuang Academy, the National Library of China, that has over 10,000 scrolls from Dunhuang as well in Beijing, the Bibliothèque Nationale, the Musée Guimet, the Hermitage and Institute of Oriental Studies in St. Petersburg, and the British Library and the British Museum, as well as Japanese colleagues and Korean colleagues. And since 1994, when we established the project, we've been digitizing manuscripts. We have to conserve them first. It takes a long time to digitize them because they have to be treated very carefully. But in terms of Dunhuang material, we're not just doing Dunhuang, we're doing all the Central Asian material. In terms of Dunhuang material, we're about 60% there. Now, I'm just doing a project proposal for finishing the Dunhuang material, and that's from all the collections. France has digitized all its material at the Bibliothèque Nationale. I should say. Dunhuang Academy has done all the material in the Dunhuang Academy. In England, we've done about 2/3. In Russia, there's a certain amount done. National Library China is also less than half, but working very, very hard at this. You ask what can be done to speed, and it's all publicly and freely available. So you can look at all these high-quality images online, idp.bl.uk, and we have multilingual websites in 8 different languages, so you can look at it on idp.nlc.cn, National Library China website in China. You ask what can be done to speed up the process. I couldn't agree more. We would love to speed up the process. A lot of the manuscripts require some conservation in order to enable them to be digitized. I estimate to finish the material at the British Library, we need 6 conservators and 6 photographers for 6 years, working flat out on this material. So that's what, 660, 72 staff. I fundraise for this work, and I haven't managed yet to fundraise for 72 staff over 6 years, so it doesn't go that fast. But what can be done to speed it up is funding, because that's what we all need as institutions. Our institutions all support us as far as they're able, but to do faster, better work, and to do the conservation required. So yeah, it's all there, and so thank you for asking this question. I should say all the paintings from the Guimet and the British Museum from Dunhuang are also online. A lot of the textiles from Dunhuang, from the Victoria and Albert Museum, also online, and we work very closely with Jiaofeng in Hangzhou on the Silk Road textiles. So there's a wealth of material, all freely available, so please do look at it. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Well, that's,
Can you hear
by
me
the way,
okay?
that's an appeal for money, too.
Well, it's just like the Silk Road, it's money.
Well, I was going to ask something a little bit similar but slightly different. But first, I just wanted to say, as a private individual, having visited Dunhuang, all the caves will blow you away. But the ones that blow you away the most are the ones that have been conserved so fantastically by the staff at the Academy. And it's hard to express the difference between the caves. They just look brighter, they're more exciting to visit. And so my question is really about, again, how can we speed up what is a huge project? You talked about hundreds of caves that need to be conserved. And how are you going to train the numbers of staff? How are you going to make this process finite? Because it could almost be like, as we say in England, painting the 4th bridge, an infinite process. So how are you going to speed that up? How are you going to achieve the conservation of all those hundreds of caves?
Let me try that, and then you can. I think we're all anxious to see the caves conserved. It's not necessarily only a question of funding, but it's a question of skills and ability to be able to implement the work. We developed with the Dunhuang Academy a 10-year project to really understand causes of deterioration, to really develop methods of treatment, to really test the materials that were used, and then to implement them. So there's just a limit to the skill set, the number of hands that can be brought to bear in doing in conserving the caves. There's also that wise Latin saying, which I always quote, festina lente, hasten slowly, because if one intervenes too rapidly, as has been the tendency in many parts of China and elsewhere, to fix things, it's almost surefire recipe for later problems and disaster. So we really need to be cautious and measured and take our time to do the conservation work at the caves.
Yeah. Actually, the central government and the provincial government paid more attention to the Dunhuang caves and give us the big money to support the conservation and another things. But it is very important of the intelligent, talent staff to do the conservation and management work. So we need to get the fund to support the education and the training. This is very, very, very important for every science organizations, but also for the Dunhuang Academy. The Dunhuang Academy in the past years, Dunhuang Academy focused on the staff educated and the training. So in the future, we'd like to continue this. As you know, many caves has a different technique and different deteriorations. So if we want to do the conservation work, we need to carry out the many steps: the environment monitoring, condition survey, and scientific analysis, and material evaluation, and so on. So that is very, very hard work to be done. Yeah, thank you.
Christina.
I want to thank all the speakers for a wonderful presentation you gave, and also I have visited the international Dunhuang project many times before the Dunhuang exhibition. I just want to thank Susan for your wonderful work, and also Wang Yuanzhang, Dunhuang Academy, the digital cave is fantastic. It gave me a lot of education because we didn't go. My husband and I, we're going to go with Marsha in September. My question is, as a person, since I have seen all the digitized things, and I have something foreign in my head, and I get so much education, I have to confess, after the opening 2 weeks ago, when I first time saw the Diamond Sutra, 金刚经, 只有2页. What happened to the rest of the panels? And I was really hope that I can see the last panel, because that is the one that he is memorized his parents, and it has Zhenbao, Zhenguan Tang Dynasty. It was just I really wish that I can see the real text, dream come true. So my question to all the panels is for the museum displays, especially for the manuscript and the Paleo 4524. It is such a emotion, things you tell in the story. Is there a way that after you digitize those things, how are you going to change so for us we can see things differently?
Just a point about the Diamond Sutra and the panels. Yes, we only brought 2 panels. Diamond Sutra was originally a scroll like everything else, and we've carried out a 10-year program of conservation because it had linings, inappropriate linings put on during the 20th century. I should say a lot of our conservation work for all of us, I think, is undoing work that was done in the 20th century, obviously with the best intentions. Conservators did the work they thought was good at the time, but techniques change and we do as little intervention as possible. So the past 10 years, we've been removing the inappropriate linings off the Diamond Sutra and letting it rest. And this was completed a few years ago, but it's still in separate panels and it's just resting at the moment. We've had it all on display at the British Library over the past year and a half, but the end panel had to, because it was on display quite recently, had to stay back home and rest for a little longer and go back into the vaults. All the manuscripts at the British Library and at all our partner institutions can be viewed in our reading rooms by scholars, and we get regular scholarly visits. So you can come, make an application and look at that material, and we do attempt to put it on display as much as possible. So, but obviously with 50,000 plus manuscripts from the Dunhuang cave, it's a bit difficult to find exhibition space for all of it. It is digitized, by the way, so you can see the colophon.
I think this has to be the last question because we're heading towards lunch now. So, Chris.
Okay, great. So I'd be somewhat remiss not to mention the Dunhuang Foundation. The Dunhuang Foundation in the United States is an organization that's been developed to really help the Dunhuang Academy with their strategic initiatives and help organizations like the International Dunhuang Project that Susan Whitfield heads. So I'd actually invite any of you to go onto the website, the dunhuangfoundation.us, to see if there are ways in which you might want to support. But also I think we could use this as an opportunity for both Susan and Director Wang to very quickly mention some of the projects that we've helped them with. So for Susan, maybe the conservator, or Director Wang, the conservation training program, because I think that those are two areas that really, this is a huge impact that this is having on the future of Dunhuang studies and also the way in which people can access material.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for that. The Dunhuang Foundation, as I said, we're very reliant on the generosity of external funders for most of our work, and we recently received a generous grant from the Dunhuang Foundation to employ a conservator to train with one of our experienced conservator in scroll conservation, and she's currently working on the Dunhuang scrolls, and she'll be working for the next year and a half, and I hope after then we'll be able to find further funds to continue her work and for her to pass on her skills to another generation of conservators. And this is a vital part of our work, and we very much appreciate the support.
Yeah. In the future, we just focus on the conservators' education and training, like Kotor, GCI, and Lanzhou University, Peking University, which Dunhuang Foundation support us to get the funding. But also, we would like to focus on the Dunhuang studies and the Silk Road studies, the exchange, scholar exchange. We would like to develop the young scholar exchange to Dunhuang, to workshop, to do workshop, seminar, and to exchange the knowledge and to do the interdisciplinary research from different culture, different background. Yeah. So this is very important for the future. That Dunhuang, in the ancient time, Dunhuang is the very close. Now we need to get the international scholars, especially the young scholars, to join us to study the Dunhuang and to disseminate the another countries for the development of the world culture diversity. Thank you.